Hello and welcome to Writers and Books Visiting Author Series. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs. Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages, all currently available online. Our theme for 2021 is Taking Care. We're celebrating different ways we can take care of ourselves and take care of others this year. You can check out our upcoming schedule at wab.org. Please say hello in the chat and let us know you're there. Feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function. Books are available through our bookstore, Ampersand Books. I'll put the links in the chat. We're so excited to have Meg Kearney with us this evening. First, we'll hear her read, then she'll be in conversation with Steve Huff. Steve Huff is the author of 2 collections of stories, Blissful and Other Stories, and A Pig in Paris, and 3 collections of poems, More Daring Escapes, The Water We Came From, and A Fire in the Hill. The founding editor of Tiger Bark Press, he teaches creative writing in the Solstice Low-Residency MFA program at Pine Manor College. Meg Kearney's most recent poetry collection, All Morning the Crows, is the winner of the 2020 Washington Prize for Poetry. The author of The Ice Storm, Home by Now, and An Unkindness of Ravens, as well as a trilogy of verse novels for teens, Meg is widely published in journals and anthologies. She is the founding director of the Solstice Low-Residency MFA in Creative Writing program at Pine Manor College. A native New Yorker, Meg currently resides in New Hampshire. Meg, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Dan, for having me, hosting me, and thanks to Writers and Books for all you've done to promote all kinds of writers and literature throughout this pandemic, especially, through your virtual programming. Really appreciate it. And Steve, I so appreciate your being here tonight too with me, and all of you who are out there in virtual audience land. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So should I begin? All right. So I'm going to read about 20 minutes and then Steve will come on and we will have our conversation. So I'm not actually at home right now. I am in New Hampshire, but I'm up in the White Mountains on my annual writing retreat. This is, I'm in a cabin that I'm very privileged and honored to be allowed to stay in. I've been coming up here for, I don't know, more than 30 years now, since 1988, I guess it is. I started staying in these cabins and the families who owns them has kind of adopted me. So I am gonna read some of the poems from All Morning the Crows that feature a woman and her dog at a cabin in the White Mountains. Imagine that, because a lot of these poems were born in this place. So I thought it might be a really nice kind of gift back to the cabin to read some of these poems tonight. And then I'll kind of change course after a few of those. But I will begin with Thrush. So All Morning the Crows features 52 poems, and each poem is the name of a different bird. That said, the poems aren't necessarily about birds, although they are inspired by birds, and birds are often their jumping off point. Thrush. Deep in the forest behind my cabin, a wood thrush plays its flute. Clear, ethereal, almost eerie notes. The dog, dozing on the grass, pricks up one ear. I move my chair with the sun, but he stays in a hemlock's shadow. The bird could be a hermit thrush, its song now a kind of scolding. Alert, the dog sits, his ears tense, lifted. I've been selfish, bringing us here with my books and pencils. Years ago, I stood on this cabin's porch, dreaming I heard a bird singing in the cage my bones make. Whatever it was, I let it go. There is a path through these woods. The dog and I might yet find that thrush, its round notes followed by a pip, pip, pip. But the great poets have already given us the thrush, and the trees are stuffing daylight into their big black coats. Okay, from there we'll go to Chickadee, which is another one of these kind of woman in her cabin poems with her dog. Chickadee. She's reached a new low in loneliness. Now she thinks the chickadee returns her call. Dozy with noon heat and still wet from their walk to the spring. The dog opens one eye as she steps from the porch, blows a sort of too-hoo toward 3 scrubby pines behind the cabin. In bare feet, she picks her way across the grass, calls again, waits. All winter back home while the dog napped, she waited at the window with the cats, watching chickadees spill a thimbleful of seed from the feeder for each seed they snatched. That silent show making the hollow space inside her echo only louder with the footsteps of her dead. Her father, 2 mothers, lately too many friends. When the chickadee goes silent, she calls H, who knows why each summer she comes to this cabin alone with her dog. H lives in the city. She may as well be in the 19th century up here in Franconia, whistling to birds. Just like Wordsworth, she tells H, remember in the prelude? Screw Wordsworth, says H. The chickadee resumes his namesake call, chickadee-dee-dee. She loves H even when he's cruel. Still, a chill blows through her hollows. H has to go. Listen, there's the bird. She whistles back. So what? She's a fool. And here is the dog, come again to fetch her. He leans, damp fur of his hip cool against her knee. The pines are silent as he turns and she follows back to the shade of the porch. And I'm just going to read one more of those cabin poems. The dog literally ages over the course of the book, which is basically what he did in the course of my writing all of these poems up here. So this is a somewhat longer poem called Ravens. It was actually one of the last poems to kind of come as I was putting this collection together. Ravens. The black dog is aged now. His breaths heave like a rusty bellows. He no longer ventures far from the cabin. The woman has just helped him down the 2 wood steps, holding his back end up with a sling. All week, the road to town has been closed. From the little knoll where the cabin sits, she can see where the road forks. The sign men in orange vests were pounding into the shoulder there as she and the dog arrived at July's end. Ravens are nesting nearby again. Ravens mate for life, considered, strangely enough, she thinks, a mark of intelligence. She hopes by now they know her and the dog, hopes they'll swoop, then settle on the huge rock, big as a compact car, where she has placed some crackers, a few red grapes. There goes another tourist in an SUV thinking he's going south toward town. Road closed sign, be damned. Already the dog is asleep in the grass. He won't be climbing Cannon or Indian Head or the Copper Mine Trail to Bridal Veil Falls. One raven flaps upwind overhead, carrying a furred dark thing. She hurries to the porch for her binoculars. Damn, they must be here, she frets, behind all these books, under these papers, her scribbled poems ruffling in the breeze. The one about the bee house flutters to the floor like a leaf. And here comes the tourist again, white Ford heading back up the hill. That's number 36 today, not that she's counting. Under the dog's towel, binoculars. Like the car, the raven, a speck now over distant oaks, has also headed east toward Bethlehem. Surely that means something, she thinks. Didn't ravens have some connection to Christ? Maybe that was magpies. Pelicans? It certainly isn't ominous, not in a bad way. Rarely have they been that, even from the earliest days of her raven dreams, back when they spoke to her, pulled at her hair. Awake, the dog sniffs the air, eyes closed to the overcast sky. There goes number 37, red canoe tied to the roof rack. See you back in 5.5 minutes, she says. The dog yawns. If she wears binoculars around her neck, neither raven will show. 38, blue pickup. No lie, sign couldn't be more clear. Road closed 1/2 mile. A handful have turned around, but most keep going, barely tapping their brakes. What does that say about human nature? She asks the dog. Maybe the big boulder with the crackers and grapes is too close to the cabin. Crows seem to her more bold than ravens, as if either is going to be her friend. She slips the harness over the dog's head, straps him to the 2-wheeled cart. He is his own noble chariot. Fine fog seems to be filling the trees as a wood thrush trills her flute. See, one Vermonter in a green Subaru turned around. What a silly obsession, fueled by countless hours on the porch. She's been trying to write about loneliness without using the words rain, radio, or moon. Scratch also mother, dog. But there now. Not one, but 2 ravens gliding toward the notch. She wants them to mean something. They fly south directly over 37 and 38, the blue truck behind the car with the canoe, following at last the detour signs. She can just make out Cannon. Really, it's all of the notch that's visible, its peak snagged by cloud. Blue mist hugs its sides. Then it happens so fast. A cloud curtain pulls itself down, down, and all is gray. Ravens ride the foreground like a signature. The dog sniffs the cookie in her hand, turns his head. Oh, she says, good boy, mama's best boy. Later, she'll take the bucket, hike to the spring without him. For now, he heads south, as the ravens do, down the mist-filled lawn into cloud. Okay, now I'm gonna change things up a little bit. My dad would have been 100 years old on July 29th, so not so long ago, if he had lived that long, but he actually died a long time ago. So this is Pheasant, and this is for him and for my mom. Pheasant. This pheasant won't be shot by fat men after breakfast. This pheasant's etched in stone. But there I go again, dreaming of home, my father's love of pheasants, my father long gone. The stone is granite and marks my father's grave. All morning the crows have behaved badly while the pheasant, wings stretched wide, waits for a flight that never begins. He's been ready just 20 years, yet his rock is showing wear. So much for immortality. Who will save you now? Mock the crows, pulling plastic tulips from the ground. Not the pheasant, bound by stone into silence. Not his brother crow, that clown, who has staked a claim to the fresh earth mound where my mother lies, so newly arrived, she's still saying her hellos. So I actually had two mothers. My first mother had to give me up when I was a baby. So I was adopted at age 5 months. But there's quite a number of poems in this book about my first mother and attempting to tell some of her story. So I'm going to read just a few of those, starting with House Finch. So back in the late 1930s, people who dealt in selling birds in cages brought a whole bunch of house finches from California to New York and were selling them illegally in New York. And when they were about to be caught, these bird dealers released a bunch of house finches on Long Island. So that's all you need to know before I read this poem. So this is House Finch, Long Island, 1940. Most arrived in wood and wire cages, some in brass domes, all to be sold as pets to lovers under umbrellas packed spoke to spoke on Jones Beach, or to the Smiths of Smithtown enjoying their backyard beer and barbecue afternoons. Soon the house finch, let loose, would populate the East just as the Smiths and Joneses were doing, copulating like good Catholics until even the gulls couldn't compete. But that summer, 1940, Hollywood finches were as exotic as Mai Tais, another splash of California color newly arrived to the North Shore. There, The Smiths still preferred their Budweiser and Irish whiskey, but they did applaud the release of the Finches. My first mother was a young girl then, maybe 30 inches tall, barely big enough to fetch Papa Smith a beer. She had nothing to fear, warbling around the yard like a bird. She didn't yet know how a cage can spring up around you, spirit you away and alone. She didn't yet know that once the door clicks shut behind you, there's no going home. And I'll read one more poem inspired by her. This is a sonnet, and it'll kind of answer what that last poem just kind of foreshadowed. This is Cardinal, 1961. Cardinal. Maybe all along it wasn't God, but a bird who had called her years before. What else explains this urge for flight from these convent walls? She refuses to heed her own heart's ominous hisses. She might confuse the devil with a high priest, with the bird she heard during Vespers. Red fused in her mind along with that cursed girl in the fairy tale who pricks her finger on a spindle. Briar Rose was only doomed until the prince. Is it he her heart truly fears? She has no time for princes or 100 years. Once she read a caged cardinal sings, then dies of grief. She must steal herself away, or so a cardinal's trill convinces. Remember, Jesus loved a thief. And I'm going to end with Wren, which is just completely different from all the other poems that I've read. So on St. Stephen's Day, which is December 26th of every year, people in Celtic countries, Norse Celtic countries, celebrate St. Stephen's Day. St. Stephen was martyred by stoning, and it was said that when he was in hiding, his location was given away by a wren. So it is the tradition of mummers, who are these kind of actors, mimes, to go around house to house on St. Stephen's Day, begging for a tuppence for the wren that they're carrying around with them. Often it's a stuffed wren or a fake wren, although in the old days it used to be a live wren or a once live wren. Okay. Wren. It's a winter wren, mouse-like and secretive, that's made a home in the pocket of my old canvas coat. Hanging on a nail inside the tool shed, that coat's kept a couple of generations dry. Why not another? Besides, the bird's nest solves a mystery. I'd thought I'd heard a song sparrow, that hard two-syllable kimp kimp call, but I couldn't place those high tinkling warbles tucked deep in the ferns and thick underbrush beyond the weeping willow. Once I thought I'd heard God calling from there. That turned out to be an uncommon bird too. At least it didn't appear in any guide. One book says it's not uncommon to find a house wren nesting in your coat pocket. A winter wren is favored by mummers, those straw boys of Dingle playing penny whistles through their motley masks, begging a tuppence to bury the bird on St. Stephen's Day? Why do the Irish martyr a wren to honor St. Stephen? You'll have to ask them. William Blake warned against it, but they aren't about to allow some Englishman to mar a custom, even if he was a great poet. Which brings me back to this wren in my pocket. Its name might come from the Swedish vrensk, uncastrated, or the Anglo-Saxon wren, lascivious. Prostitutes were once called wrens. Another reason why I'll leave this nest alone, not feeling righteous enough to cast the first stone. Thank you. Steve, you can turn your camera on. Hey.
There you are. Okay. Good reading. Very good reading.
Thanks so much.
Just a few questions. Now, in the forward to your book, you give us a lot of information here, and you mention the book 100 Birds and how they got their names as one inspiration for this sequence of poems, and but I'm wondering, that seems to be almost like the opening of a chest of language or something. When your first book was called An Unkindness of Ravens, and you lived in New York City then, and now you've lived in New Hampshire for quite a long time, and so I'm wondering, is there a deeper relationship with the metaphor of birds, anything to do with location?
I hadn't thought about that. The Raven poems in that first book, they were all based and inspired by dreams. And as you will recall, because you were my publisher at BOA when that book was published, they were really my first entryway into talking about anything adoption related. I was kind of in the closet as an adoptee up until that point, even though I was in my 30s already. And the Raven became kind of my mask at that time in order to speak about something that I had never really felt that was possible for me to talk about in public. And I can remember you at some point when we were working on that book and finalizing it, saying, I wonder if you can ever be more explicit, Meg, because they were so masked, all those Raven poems. And now the birds, this time, I did use 100 Birds and how they got their names as kind of I started off kind of as just this giant prompt, right? To write 100 poems to go with the 100 birds in Diana Wells' book, 100 Birds and How They Got Their Names. And it ended up to be, of course, much more than that, and kind of took on a life of its own. And I was finding that using the birds was allowing me to sometimes get away from the personal I. And then in other times, it allowed me to dive into some very deep personal material. So I don't know if location had anything to do with it. I mean, even when I lived in New York, I was still coming up to this cabin. So yeah, I don't know. It is interesting that the birds just keep following me and inspiring me. But this time it feels very different from that first book.
Well, you indeed have become a lot more explicit, and your poem, for example, your poem Crow, you're talking about your birth mother, and you're speaking, I believe, to your sister. And you're saying, our mother did not speak a secret language. She spoke the language of secrets. Now, those are lines that stop me. They're the kind of lines that, you can the reader can wander into, and they just keep opening. I'm not asking for a clarification, but to me, that you're becoming a lot more explicit about what you were just talking about, the deeper aspects of that relationship with your birth mother, because she had been in the convent, which I think is partly what is alluded to there. That she did not speak a secret language. She spoke the language of secrets. Boom.
Yeah, which is often what you could say poetry is.
Mm-hmm. Well, good point.
Yeah, she spoke in a very masked way to her children, who didn't know, of course, about me, much less the fact that our mother had been a nun. She had told them that she had been in Catholic boarding school.
Oh.
Yeah, and then she died in 1983. They would have been 13 and 14 years old, and I would have been 19. I would have been in college. So it wasn't until I found them in 1999 that they learned that our mother had been in the convent for 8 years, almost 8 years.
Mm-hmm. So she did speak the language of secrets.
Yeah, she had a lot of secrets. A lot of them died with her.
Your poem Goldfinch, I wanted to ask you about that, because the goldfinch, the bird goldfinch in the poem is, you call the bird goldfinch as though it were its proper first name, and not just a species, but a proper first name. And that's very much like the way a Native American story or myth would go. Black bear does this, turtle does that, and I was wondering if there's some influence or maybe allusion to those kinds of stories, Native American stories.
That's so interesting. I knew that I had done that, but I hadn't really investigated why. I have done lots and lots of reading of traditional American Indian tales, and have listened to many American Indian storytellers. So I'm definitely familiar with a lot of the different tribes, cultures, and stories and ways of telling them. So maybe some of that creeped into my approach to the Goldfinch poem. But that's such a great question. I hadn't really thought about what I was doing there in that way. But yeah.
I also wanted to ask you about the poem Petrols on page 41. Now, this is classic double entendre, and our ship in its bottle is forever tossed at sea. 2 petrols follow lee's side, 2 in our wake. There's ice in the rigging, lifeboats are all fake. Petrols seem to walk on water, but skim the surface for our chum. Now you go on and you talk about each night we spew that overboard, and then suddenly the rum bottle gets involved here. So there's the image of the ship in the bottle, and then there's sort of the concept of boozing it up and putting yourself, the whole ship, as it were, in a bottle. and and then what is fake? Our lifeboats are all fake. What is fake? Once if you put if if the whole ship ends, if rum puts the whole ship in the bottle, then it's an open question what's fake. And so I mean it gets it's a fascinating poem because of the double entendre.
Yeah, it's kind of a bottle within a bottle.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the bottle that, of course, is their downfall. And it's the bottle in it. Maybe you've read most of it, so I'll just read the last part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Each night we spew that overboard, rinse our stinking mouths with rum. I knew it was a dumb idea to climb aboard this ship. Said it just before you offered that first nip. Before the Petrols, before the squall, before the bottle made us small.
See, that's the perfect last line. I was afraid the ship was going to sink, but instead you said, "Before the bottle made us small." So that's to me that really ties the poem together. It kind of embraces the poem. Yeah, fascinating poem. Were you thinking of a story of some ship experience? Or?
You know, I was really honestly just following the sound of the poem and letting that lead me there with that one.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, as you can tell, it's just loaded with rhyme.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a certain rhythm to it, and it was one of the few of these that kind of came all at once.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, I do a lot of walking up here especially, but it's sometimes poems, this probably happens to you too, Steve, like a poem will come to you while you're walking and then you can't wait to, you don't have a piece of paper with you to scribble it down. It was one of those, that kind of came to me as I was walking and felt almost like a song.
Do you ever write the line on your skin so it'll be there when you get back? I've done that. I've written stuff on my arm.
Yeah, good luck. All right.
Maybe we should. I'd like to see if others have questions here for a moment. Let's see. There's a lot of congratulations here. Let's see. Now, I don't see actual questions, but there's some lovely things here. Tuning in from unceded Pueblo land in New Mexico.
Wow.
Yeah, from Nancy Helga and Julia Glass. Wonderful, Meg. Thank you. From Nancy Helge. Wonderful reading. Thanks. Oh, from Gail Hosking. She's a local poet in Rochester. Wonderful to listen to. Oh, Zvinia Orlowski is here with beautiful reading, Meg. Kate Russian, thank you. From Gail Hoskins again to all panelists. Beautiful. From, Mary Gilliland.
Yeah.
Petrols is an incredible poem. It is an incredible poem. This is probably going to be an impossible question to answer. So I'll ask anyway. When you're working on a collection of poems that's so metaphorically conjoined. Now, naturally, some of them are less about birds. In fact, none of them are completely about birds. But you have a collection that you're working. There had to have been a certain energy that just kept pulling that project along.
Yeah, this was an unusual project for me in that I sat down up here to start working on writing these poems, and I knew I had a year before I had this other book, one of the novels in verse for teens that I had a contract on, the third book in that trilogy I had to write. And so I knew I had a year to kind of fool around and write something else before I had to start writing that next verse novel. So I wrote the 100 poems that year, and then I had to set that project aside, the bird poem, to write this other thing. But that is such a gift that we don't, so often, at least I don't give myself, to put something aside for a couple of years actually, and then come back to it with completely fresh eyes, and you're in a different place as a person, but you know how some teachers tell you, like, when you're revising a poem, pretend that you just picked it off the ground and found like somebody's random poem, so you can look at it like that fresh.
Found art, yeah.
Yeah, that was the gift that gave to me. I was able to come to those poems and see them so clearly and throw out, most of them. Know what ones were worth saving, and see the threads that were starting to run through all these, the birth mother thread and the woman in the cabin with the dog thread are two of the main ones. There's a few that run through, and then to start kind of revising with all of that in mind.
Did you wonder where it would end?
Yeah, I did. And I was also wondering, like, why I was having no luck writing the Ravens poem or the Crows poem, which you would think that those would have been the first two that I kind of tackled, but just threw out so much material, just couldn't get there. And then finally, those were the last two poems to come. But when I wrote Sparrow, I knew I had the last poem in the book when I wrote Sparrow, because it just seemed like you couldn't put that poem anywhere else but at the end.
I've gotten Dan Hurd has drawn a bead on us here. He said we have time for one more question. I think some folks listening here do not know about the 3 novels in verse. Do you want to talk about those briefly?
Yeah, sure. As I was saying, when I first started being able to write about the fact of my adoption through those Raven poems, with Raven as my mask, I was really just starting to kind of delve into this material that, was really essential to the core of my, who I am. But I still needed a mask to explore that story.
And your mask was that character?
And that was
protagonist?
That's Lizzie McLean. Through her, I was able to tell essentially my childhood story with a lot of other stuff made up. But Lizzie McLean is the 14-year-old I wish I had been. She's much braver than I was at age 14.
You may have been braver than you remember. Dan, I guess we're at, there he is.
Hey, thank you so much. That was really wonderful. It was a great reading and a great talk. So thank you to Meg. Thank you, Steve Huff. Buy the book. The link is in the chat. I want to thank our funders here. There they are. A video of this reading will be online on our website within a week. And I want to thank everyone for coming, and have a great night.
Yeah, thanks to everyone for coming. Thank you, writers of books, and Dan and Steve, and I really appreciate it. And everyone stay safe and healthy.
You do the same.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.